This program is brought to you by Emory University.
I want to welcome you to the Center for Creativity and Arts Creativity Conversation with Gary Motley and Donald Sosin. You have in front of you two fabulous artists, one of whom is a resident artist at Emory who runs the jazz program in the music department and is a performer and a teacher and a wonderful artist. And Donald Sosin, who is a Schwartz Artist in Residency artist. I think there's too many artists in there. And he will not only be doing the creativity conversation this afternoon with Gary, talking about improv and piano, but also this evening performing at the Carlos Museum for Ernst Lubitsch's silent film Loves of Pharaoh at 7:30. So please join us there. And gentlemen, I leave you to it.
Hey.
Well, let's start with this. I think just the whole notion of creativity, and when we talk about improvisation, most times people think that improvisation is limited specifically to jazz, and they don't realize that it can exist in different types of music, and also in different settings. So I wanted to kind of start with talking with you about how you use improvisation in the musical settings that you work in.
Well, I do a number of different musical things, ranging from playing church in the local Catholic church where I'm improvising organ music every Sunday, to doing the dance classes that I used to play for where I was improvising for dancers, silent films, which I've been doing for a long time, which is a lot of improvisation, sometimes writing out parts for musicians, but mostly when I'm on my own, I'm just improvising because I'm lazy. But I think it's more efficient that way, and I get to stay in touch with the film when I'm playing, instead of being bound to a piece of music, whether I've written it or somebody else has written it.
How did you get started with playing music for silent film?
For films, I started at the University of Michigan when I was a student, and then I met the guy that was playing at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and he invited me to play there, and he left. I took his place. So I've been doing that for about 40 years.
Wow, that's amazing. In working with that, how do you approach looking at visual activity and interpreting that and being spontaneous with it?
It's a great question, Gary. There's so many different kinds of films, and sometimes there's a lot of activity on the screen, and you want to not be as active as what's there, because then you're getting like the same information twice. So sometimes it demands it, and sometimes you have to just be quiet and let the action speak for itself and only comment in some kind of emotional way. And I think the most classical, the classic example of that in contemporary film is what Coppola did with Apocalypse Now, when he put the Samuel Barber Adagio in for all of these war scenes. He didn't play war in the way the films would have been played in the 40s or 50s with lots of martial music and so forth. He just played the emotional tragedy of the moment and chose this beautiful piece to represent all of that. So have you scored films also?
I have not done a lot of work with film, some with television short works, but no, it's something I've always been fascinated with.
Well, turn off the TV and just play whatever's on.
Well,
I tell my students, turn off the football sound and play what you're seeing there.
I do have a funny kind of parallel to that. In growing up, the room that our piano was in, there were large windows and you could look outside. And one of the things I did enjoy doing was just looking out and seeing the scenery, and the weather, and just kind of trying to play what I saw. So if it was snowing outside, then I would try to capture that, or if it was a really hot day or something, or if it was raining, I'd see if I could try to capture those images musically.
I love it.
And that was really funny, because I do remember now, seeing all the four seasons going by, just sitting there and watching that and being really fascinated with that.
Cool. I used to play when my cat would crawl across the keys and make some sounds, and then she would land up on the windowsill. So I would try to imitate what she had done and then play some music that I would hope was going to attract her back in the opposite direction, but generally the birds outside were more entertaining. So.
Yeah. We have a lot of fun with that, with our dog now. Sometimes when I'm practicing, it's really neat. He'll come and he just kind of lays down and just kind of checks things out. And so I can kind of tell, you know, if I'm on the right track, if he's digging it, if he goes off and leaves, it's like, okay, work on something else. You know? But one of the things you mentioned about the whole idea of interacting with the film, in jazz, it would be the same as musicians working in a band. If you have a soloist who's out front and there's a lot of activity going on with that soloist, then in terms of how we accompany them, we want to leave a little bit more space and support what it is that's going on there. So do you think of what you're doing and what you do when you're interpreting what's happening with a film as really providing support?
Support, accompaniment. The music is, for me, not primary. It's the film that has to take precedence. Otherwise, it's just a composer being on an ego trip and saying, you know, I write this great music, and oh yeah, there's a film on. And there are young musicians that I think have that sort of attitude about, they play their rock or avant-garde music, which is fine, but then the film becomes secondary. So it shifts the focus of that event to a musical event instead of a film event. So it just depends on what your intention is.
Okay. If you're looking at say a period piece, what tools and resources do you draw on? For example, if you're interpreting something that was done, say, in the 60s versus something that was done in the 20s, so how do you mentally shift gears to, you know, to try to interpret something?
Talk about silent films?
Yes.
Well, few silent films from the 60s.
Right,
so,
but I was just, as an example of...
As an example, let's say
yeah.
let's say we have a film that was made in 1900 versus a film that was made in 1930.
Sure.
So the technical aspects of the films are likely to be very different in those two time periods. The scenes are shorter, possibly. The emotional content is maybe not so subtle as it is in the later period, where you might have just long shots of people's faces, as in the Carl Dreyer film Passion of Joan of Arc. Maybe some of you have seen that, where the musician has very little to go on action-wise. All you see are these big close-ups of the judge and of Joan, and so you're left to see what you can do to interpret those. With an action film, if it's a Chaplin comedy or Keaton or Langdon or Lloyd, then you have to make a choice about, are you going to play the period in which the film was made or the period in which the film was set? Like tonight's film is set in ancient Egypt, but it's made in Germany. So, what do you follow? You probably have to go with the period in which the film is set, no matter when it was made. That makes sense?
Yes, absolutely. As a pianist, what are your sources of inspiration when you go into something like that? Are you purely reacting to what's happening, or do you have anything that you draw from as a kind of a standard reservoir of ideas? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it depends on the film. Some films I know very well, and I play themes that I've played for them before that I've written, or some films have songs that you can see the lyrics on the screen, or you see the title of the gramophone record, and so I research those and try to find sometimes a recording from the period that I can sync up in my computer so that the needle drops and then you hear the sound of the record. That's a little bit rare. With some films, I don't get to see them before I'm playing for them. There are festivals in Italy where the pianists show up and the prints have come in from archives all over the world and there's no time to preview them, although that's less so now that with DVD and online capabilities, so we usually get to see it. But if there's no time before the film to see it, it's just what what occurs to me on the spur of the moment based on what is in my fingers, which is 40, 50 years of playing classical repertoire and folk music and theater music and jazz and making up my own stuff. And it's a field of all possibilities when it comes to music.
Tell me some more about your piano background.
Piano background,
Yes.
started studying classical piano when I was 4 and did that through college and afterwards. And I began playing for shows when I was 12 and did that through high school and college, and then on Broadway after I got out of school for about 10 years. Folk music, play a little guitar, play a little bass, a lot of choral music. I accompanied choruses all through junior high up through college and now professionally. So and church music and synagogue music, and I'm kind of like this sponge
Yes.
for music of all kinds, and it fills my life, and it makes me very happy to learn more different kinds of music and meet other great musicians. So,
Yeah. People say there are a lot of different approaches that you can take to playing music, even in different styles. As I said, most times improvisation is usually associated with jazz, and people don't realize that improvisation takes on many forms. When we really get right down to it, Bach was the first improviser. We always joke and say he was the first jazz musician. At what point did you start to experiment with the whole notion of improvisation, and at what point did you really start to kind of embrace that and become?
oh, very early, because I can still hear my mother saying, "Donnie, stop noodling. Play those scales, play those scales." So now she understands that the noodling had a purpose,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
because it pays the rent.
There you go.
So I don't know, 6, 7, I was playing whatever I wanted to play at the piano, and then listening to other music from the radio or from the songs that we had a wonderful music teacher in school who gave us Rodgers and Hammerstein and Lerner and Lowe songs to sing, and pop songs of the 50s and early 60s. So I absorbed all that and then started writing my own music in that style.
So, you do improvise in a number of different styles, and you're very, very
I try.
comfortable with that. Why don't we do this? Can you take a song, for example, and kind of give us a statement of the melody, and then show how you would kind of expand on that?
Okay. Any particular song?
Your call.
Somebody want to suggest a song? I usually take requests for Beatles songs or children's songs. Twinkle, Twinkle. Well, Mozart did his own variations on this, So, Twinkle, everybody knows it. Can we sing it? Twinkle. Good. Also A, B, C, D, E, F, G, which my daughter knows backwards and forwards. She's 3. Also Ba, Ba, Black Sheep. So already there's different improvisations on the words for this. We could write our own words for this. Here we are at Emory talking about creativity. Spontaneous, not planned. All right, so Twinkle, Twinkle, what style? So we could start out with early Bach or... in a kind of a angry mood. Debussy.
So as you're putting that together, what are you thinking about other than?
As little as possible.
Once again, the same sort of thing. With jazz, we take kind of the same approach. Stylistically, I'm looking at the things and listening to the things that you're doing that are characteristic. First of all, characteristic of the style that you're playing in, and then incorporating and finding a way to integrate the melody into that. The Debussy would be very similar to something jazz musicians might do.
What I loved about that was that you started with what was known, and then you went into this kind of expansive area that just sort of kind of free form, and then you come back to the theme again.
Sure.
And it's a beautiful way of constructing improvisations where you have a kind of a stable area and then an unstable area and stable, and this sort of feeling of alternate periods of rest and activity that's very natural kind of phenomenon.
Sure. I think one of the other things too with jazz, again, the one thing you'll notice that we're both working with is the vocabulary. Once again, being very familiar with the vocabulary of the styles, and then from there, that's where the true freedom comes, because then you can start to incorporate those things and move and explore in different ways. I like the idea you say you think about things as little as possible. You know, we tell students about the whole idea of learn it and forget it. You know, because when it comes time to create, it's really getting. I oftentimes, and you tell me what you think about this. I tell students, you know, we don't really have the ability to make music. We can allow it to kind of flow out of us if we get kind of our own selves out of our own way. I mean, what do you think about that in terms of the creative process?
I was thinking about that the other day in terms of the 12-tone system, and it seems to me that it may have evolved at a point when musicians were so getting away from their own selves that they felt, I mean, particularly in Schoenberg's case, that he had to have some sort of a system that would work intellectually and forget about music and feeling and music and nature and all of the things that had been working perfectly well up to that point. And I think it's interesting that as the 20th century went on, that musicians abandoned that for the most part and went back to a much more tonal-based and more scalar in terms of what had been going on before, and recognized that music has to touch us physiologically, it has to touch us emotionally in order to really achieve a wide audience and to have a lasting effect.
I think when I go back and I look at kind of the whole evolution of music, and some people that view music as a science, because essentially the scientists were the ones who kind of started the whole notion of the study of structured, organized sound. But once again, as you say, we can't remove that sensory component, that thing that really moves us. It's those things that we can't put into words. But yet you can play a certain sound and everybody's going to know, and that it's going to quite literally be sympathetic, and it's going to literally resonate with them and going to move them.
Because we're just vibration.
Exactly.
So you sing a note, you play a note, and it has some effect on us. And we don't always know what the effect does until people throw tomatoes at us.
We often talk about the whole idea of music being a language. It's a way of speaking.
Yeah.
And it's possible for two people that don't necessarily speak the same verbal language to be able to communicate. For example, we just met this afternoon, and I think it'd be fun to just kind of demonstrate that whole notion of speaking the language and communicating.
Why not? Love to.
All right.
Okay.
What was that, Manhattan that he did?
You want to do Manhattan?
Yeah, I'll follow you.
Okay. There's a verse.
take some questions from the audience. Do you have any questions about what just happened?
I do.
Just like we rehearsed it.
It's, we're talking about vibrations. It's like sympathetic vibrations. It feels very natural to play with you. It's just, you have wonderful, wonderful technique and ideas, and this energy, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, So.
I'm curious about the process. You said you sometimes will sit at the piano and be seeing the film for the first time.
Right.
So, for example, tonight, you're performing tonight. You've seen that film. Do you play from a written score, or you just get familiar with it?
There are two scores that I know of for this film. One was written in the period. Now, David, is this an actual score that was written, or is it music of his that was put together for the film? Okay, so there is a score from Germany from the period for a huge orchestra, and there was a score that was written by a guy in Brooklyn 2 years ago that was commissioned for the Brooklyn Academy. You can listen to that on YouTube, and to excerpts of the others. And I've listened to both of them, and I admire things about them, but I'm not going to play those kinds of stylistic melodies or phrases necessarily. I have about a page of musical notes, and I have 3 pages of sight cues so that I know that the pharaoh comes out, and then the woman comes to the stairs, and then the slave girl is on the ship, and so forth. So I go by those, and I'm just watching the film, and I'm just letting it flow through me, and letting my fingers and my intuition guide me.
So, sorry, follow-up question. So,
Yeah.
do you ever do runs, like you'll do 4 nights, 5 nights of the same film, and how much does the music change from the first to the last?
Sometimes the overall sound of the film would be the same from screening to screening, but the details might vary a lot. Unless, I was talking before, or maybe it was part of this conversation, about not wanting to be chained to the music during the film, because I think if, let's say I've written a film for, music for a film that's 90 minutes long, which I've done. A piece, for example, for a Robert Vina film called The Hands of Orlok is 105 minutes for piano and organ. So we did that in Vienna last year, and the music exists, but now anybody could do it. And for me, it's just more of a mechanical process to go back and watch the film and play the same music. It's just been there, done that. I'd much rather go on and do another film or play that film in some completely different way. For the same reason, I never really liked playing Broadway shows and being in the pit for more than a couple of weeks, because it just became a routine exercise. And I know people that make their living and do the same show for 5, 10 years if it's a long run, and that's fine for them, and they do that. But it would drive me crazy. Maybe I'm ADD or something. But,
Can I ask the same sort of question of Gary then? So if you're playing with a trio and you're playing the same gig, like 3 nights in a row, and you're playing essentially the same set inside each set when you're performing the piano, does the same improvisational
No.
changes happen, or is that more set in terms of that you guys improvise the piece together and then you stick with it?
I take 2 different approaches to that. If I if I have a song that is an arrangement that I've done, the arrangement stays the same, the structure stays in place, and then the improvisation in the middle of it is free to be whatever we want it to be. There are other times when I feel the same way. I don't like routine, so I tend to mix things up. So if I know I'm going to have like 5 performances in a row, then chances are we're probably not going to play the song exactly the same way. One night it might be a waltz, and the next night it might be in 5/4.
Okay, that's sort of what I was
And it might be in a different key, because you don't feel the same way every day at exactly the same time. So if the weather's different outside,
and the audience.
And the audience is different. Yeah, audience makes a big difference in terms of what you feel and what's resonating there. If the audience is really engaged in what you're doing and you sense that, then it's going to affect what's going on. So there are all of these factors that come into play. I think the idea is you have to be willing to be open to that and be flexible with it, and then allow the performance to go where it wants to go. Oftentimes, my biggest challenge is if I try to force creativity, it will not happen.
Beautiful statement. Don't force
No, you
in
can't do
anything,
it.
whether it's life or music, or if you try to force it, it just, it bounces back at you.
Yeah. I have a rather lengthy and involved science and engineering background, so I came from this mindset of everything gets, programmed into this formula thing, and then when I discovered jazz and discovered music, all of that went out the window. So it was like going from left brain to right brain and having to rethink things. So, and Bobby, you and I we're joking about this, of how do you function in both worlds, in a world where there needs to be structure, and yet as an artist, there's this thing that you have to feed that part of yourself that wants to be spontaneous and wants to be, be totally in the moment. So, and there again, like I said, I think that's where the whole notion of improvisation, comes into play there. I also had a conversation with Robert Spano, conductor of the ASO, about the same sort of thing, and saying, it's really nice to start making a return to the whole notion of improvisation, because we kind of compartmentalized it and said, it's only limited to this thing, whereas there was a time in all music where that type of creativity was just a part of it. It was just a standard thing that everybody did and was kind of in touch with. So.
Yeah, Mozart was always playing different cadenzas for his piano concerti, and if you look at some of the scores, there's almost nothing in the piano part because he was just making it up as he went along. And Chopin probably didn't play his nocturnes or his preludes quite the same way every time, I would think.
Oh, absolutely.
So now, what about free improvisation versus more structured improvisation? Which do you enjoy?
I like the structured improvisation. I think that stylistically, the world that I live in, as far as jazz is concerned, is kind of out of the bebop and kind of post-bop periods. Bebop is to jazz as Baroque is to classical music in terms of symmetry and form and balance. But I love like Debussy and that sort of blurring the lines a little bit. But I have to work at it. I really, the idea of just saying, okay, you learn and you develop this knowledge of all of these things, and then you just say, okay, now just be free and express without any limits or guidelines or parameters. And that's like, okay, so I can do this. So I really have to focus on doing that and be careful not to fall into what I call my safety zone, of my standard go-to things. Right. And trying that. Sometimes I'll do that. Maybe we could even try this now.
Let's do it.
We'll do kind of a spontaneous improvisation. So we're going to do this. I want you to give us 3 notes. Pick a note. And that is, you got it?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Okay. Cool. Then I'll follow you. All right. There's one. Give me another note. Somebody. Okay. And
do the Bobby McFerrin thing.
And one more. One more note.
Go for it. Do.
It's possible. Never something like that.
We're just doing this?
Yeah.
Good.
wrote a really awesome song. I need to get a copy of that.
Is that available on CD and all?
I'm telling you, right after the show. So again, what just happened? Yes.
Are we open for questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
With regard to accompanying motion pictures, you talked about the importance of support and a little bit about mentioned themes and so on. But my question, I guess, is about melodies. You have to kind of suppress melodies, keep them from taking over. You have, do you provide themes for different characters? When they're making entrance or.
Can be very useful for the audience when you have a big cast like the film tonight of a priest and a pharaoh and the king of Ethiopia and his daughter and the slave girl and the builder and the son of the builder. How do you keep these guys straight? Themes, as Wagner was very fond of using, can show us what's going on, and then you can take those themes and you can transform them just like we transform this little three-note motif into a big fantasia. So, and if you get a chance to listen to this German orchestral score for this film, it's really a wonderful demonstration of this approach to scoring films where you do have character themes and they are manipulated and used for different emotional effect. There's a lot of silent films that have music which is basically just kind of generic action music and love music and danger music and so forth, and you could plug it into 10 different films and you'd never know the difference. This is written very carefully, or has been arranged by Frank Strobel in Berlin now, to be very carefully in tune with the action and the emotional flow of the film. So, but I mean, we all use themes to keep track of where we are, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you do that when you're improvising as well?
Oh, certainly, certainly. For me as a jazz musician, when I'm developing a solo, when I start into it, I try to have an opening statement, the subject, whatever it is that I'm wanting to talk about.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, sure. They're predicting rain over the next few days, so it's going to be kind of cloudy and stormy and that sort of thing. So it's going to be a little dark. So. So when I think about improvising, I'll start with something like that, and then I ask myself, what should come next? And I start moving that through. Well, I might develop some other things, but how does the story turn out? Do they live happily ever after or not? So, I have tried to weave that together. So for me, it's not like just a random sort of thing. It really is a story, and I want to have some kind of ending to it. So I want to take the listener on this journey. I think for me, where that came from for me was just growing up with a family of storytellers, and just really being fascinated with that sort of thing and saying, how can I represent that musically so that when you come into this thing and you hear what it is that I'm doing, I take you into these various places, and then I get you back. I also feel responsible. I got to get you back safely. So my intended, I'm pretty optimistic, so it would have probably gone major at some point in there. Yeah.
Well, I just look at you guys just did there, taking the three notes and starting in this very atmospheric spot, and then going to a much more sort of structured area, and then bringing us back into this sort of ethereal.
Excuse me for interrupting, but this is like if you look at Indian classical music, this is how it begins also. It begins without any sense of rhythm. You just have a few notes, the notes develop, you have maybe it goes in this direction, and then it goes a little higher, and then it comes back, and then the tabla comes in. And this must be something in nature, because that's where that music comes out of. It comes out of understanding the laws of nature in a really deep way. And I think that successful jazz improvisation or classical improvisation in the Western style or in the Eastern style all makes use of very fundamental laws. And if we follow those laws, then we have a successful event or a successful piece of music. Or we make deliberate choices to depart from that, and then anything goes. You know, we could sit down and do something which had no form, no key, no anything, and it would be a different effect.
You know, it really goes back to the fundamental definition of what music is, which is the deliberate organization of sound. Okay? Or it could be the deliberate disorganization of sound, okay? Depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So, absolutely.
I had an interesting experience recently, which I'm going to do again, of playing a piece of Eric Satie's called Vexations, which he wrote in the notes to be played 840 times. Although, if you really read it, it says, if you're going to play this piece 840 times, you have to prepare yourself with serious immobilities, whatever that means. Maybe it just means composing yourself and taking some time, which I did, to meditate beforehand. And then I played for 3 hours nonstop, over and over and over and over again. And the music was always exactly the same in that case, except when it wasn't. Except when I said, well, what if I accent this note? What if I pedal this section? Because there's no indications. So I started improvising on a very structured piece of music and thought about I sang for a while, I sang along the theme, and I'm going to do this again at a museum in upstate New York next month, and I don't know what will happen. So
I think the beauty of the music too is not knowing what's going to happen and just being really excited about, you know, where will we wind up.
well, it's like a relationship, you know?
Yeah.
If you knew exactly what was going to happen at the end of the relationship or at the end of the evening,
Yeah.
then what would be the fun?
What's the point? You know, in preparing for this presentation, Donald and I guess we were introduced maybe 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And life gets busy, life gets complicated. So we kind of played email tag back and forth. And then we had a conversation maybe a week ago. We never really talked about what we were going to do. And then we got closer and had more dialogue. We still never talked about what it was that we were going to do. We got here today. We officially met and had a conversation. We never talked about what we were going to do. And then right 5 minutes beforehand, we said, you know this song? Yeah, I know that one. Well, maybe we'll do this. Okay, fine. And we sat down and basically got to know each other musically. And I think we probably know more about each other from having sat and played musically than we would have had, you know, having several hours of a phone conversation. But because in that process, we are listening to each other and really kind of embracing, you know, where we're coming from in musical perspectives. And that mutual respect for each other, it creates this nonverbal dialogue that we were able to have, and that's what enables us to create the thing that we've created. So.
Yeah, it's also because you need to have complete understanding, you need knowledge and experience.
Right.
So we talked a little bit, we got some intellectual knowledge, but as you said, you get more from 30 seconds of playing together. You say, oh, I get what what you are, or some of what you are musically, who you are, and likewise. And we can take it from there. Just listen to somebody play for 5 seconds, you say, oh, okay, I can relax now.
It takes that little edge off. So I tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't we do one more song?
Great.
And let's see. We want to do
Something else, I don't know. Something we haven't talked about.
Something, okay.
What do you want to hear?
Harmonic minor.
What?
Harmonic minor. Harmonic minor.
Something modern?
Harmonic minor.
Harmonic minor. A song in harmonic minor? Something Egyptian maybe for
Thank you so much for
Hey,
sharing.
thank you again.
sharing
What a
tonight.
joy.
All right. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Donald Sosin.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.